I called a plumber to fix a leaking pipe at my son-in-law's house while my daughter and her husband were away on a cruise. 20 minutes later, he called me back, not to talk about the pipes. "Sir," he said, and his voice was strange, quiet, like he was trying not to be heard. "Sir, there's a kid in here, in the basement. I think you need to come over right now." I was 63 years old, retired after 31 years as a licensed social worker for the state of Ohio. I had seen things in that job that most people couldn't imagine. I had walked into houses that smelled like rot and despair, and found children curled up in corners like frightened animals. I thought that part of my life was behind me. I thought I was done with all of that. I was wrong. My daughter, Ingrid, had married a man named Boyd about 4 years earlier. I'll be honest, I never trusted him. Not from the first handshake. He was the kind of man who smiled just a half-second too late, like he had to remind himself to do it. But Ingrid loved him, or said she did, and she was 34 years old, and I was her father, not her warden. So I kept my mouth shut and I welcomed him into the family, and I tried. Boyd had a daughter from a previous relationship. Her name was Pepper. She was 7 years old when I first met her, and she was one of the quietest children I had ever seen. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the scared kind, the kind where a child has learned that being small and invisible is the safest way to survive. Her mother had died when Pepper was 3, a car accident on I-71 in the middle of a January ice storm. Boyd had been awarded sole custody, and somewhere along the way he had set up what he called a trust account. Money from her mother's life insurance policy, held in Pepper's name until she turned 18. About $80,000 total. I found out about that account much later. That detail matters, so remember it. When Ingrid and Boyd first started dating, Pepper was always there at family dinners. Quiet, well-behaved, sitting at the edge of the table like she wasn't sure she was allowed to take up space. I used to bring her little things, a book, a pack of colored pencils, once a small stuffed rabbit that she named Captain, which made me smile more than I expected. She carried that rabbit everywhere for a year. After the wedding, I saw Pepper less, then less than that. When I asked Ingrid about it, she said Boyd liked to keep family time private, that they were establishing their own routines. I told myself that was normal. Newly married couples need space. I told myself a lot of things in those 4 years. The cruise was a 10-day anniversary trip. The Bahamas, then Puerto Rico, then back. They left on a Tuesday morning. Ingrid called me from the ship's Wi-Fi the first evening, cheerful, sunburned already, laughing about the buffet. She didn't mention Pepper. I didn't think to ask. I assumed the girl was with her maternal grandparents, the Okafor family, who lived over in Dayton. We weren't close, but I knew they existed. I assumed someone had made arrangements. I don't know why I made that assumption. 31 years of professional training told me never to assume, but she was my daughter, and sometimes love makes you lazy about the things you should be paying attention to. The reason I called the plumber was a text from Boyd 3 days after they left. It said, "Hey Ed, if you could, the kitchen sink at our place has been dripping bad. Key is under the mat. Maybe send someone?" That was it. No please. No thank you. Classic Boyd. I called Hargrove Plumbing, a company I'd used for 20 years. The owner's son, a young man named Pete, said he could get out there that afternoon. I told him the address and said I'd text him the entry code for the garage. I figured it would take an hour. They'd send me the bill, and that would be that. Pete called me 47 minutes after I dropped him off. I pulled over on Millbrook Road because my hands were shaking too hard to drive safely. "She says her name is Pepper," Pete told me. "She's maybe 8, 9 years old? Sir, she's in the basement." The basement door was locked from the outside. I could hear her knocking. I almost didn't. He paused. "She hasn't eaten since yesterday morning. She says they left her here 5 days ago." 5 days. I turned the car around so fast I went up on the curb. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial in Westerville. Nice neighborhood, big oak trees, the kind of street where neighbors wave at each other from their driveways, and nobody looks too closely at anything. I had the garage code. I let myself in through the kitchen, and I moved through that house faster than a man my age has any business moving. The basement door was off the kitchen hallway. A slide bolt had been installed near the top. New hardware. I could see the bright silver of it. Couldn't have been there more than a few months. Pete had already thrown the bolt back. I opened the door. The smell hit me first. Stale air. The particular heaviness of a space that hasn't been ventilated. Then I heard the sound. A small rustling. Like something trying to make itself even smaller. She was in the far corner, behind the water heater, wrapped in an old, moving blanket. She looked up at me with these enormous dark eyes, and I swear to God, for 1 second I was 32 years old again, standing in a house on the east side of Columbus, and a child was looking at me exactly the same way, with exactly that same expression that is less fear and more the complete absence of hope. That look that says, I have stopped expecting anyone to come. Pepper, I said. I crouched down, knees aching, and I kept my voice as level as I could manage. My name is Ed. I'm Ingrid's dad. Do you remember me? She stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, You brought me Captain. I had to look away for a second. She was thin, thinner than I had last seen her, which had been at Christmas 5 months earlier. There was a folding card table set up near the furnace with a plastic bag on it. I counted 2 granola bars, a sleeve of crackers, and an empty juice box. A 5-gallon water jug sat next to it, mostly empty. There was a bucket in the corner with a lid on it, and I understood what that was for, and I did not let myself think about it too long. On the floor near her blanket was Captain, the stuffed rabbit. Still with her after all this time, Pete the plumber was standing at the top of the basement stairs with his phone out, already dialing 911. Good kid. I didn't have to tell him to do it. While we waited for the police and the paramedics, I sat on the cold concrete floor next to Pepper, and I talked to her. Not about what had happened. Not yet. I asked her about school, about what subjects she liked, about whether she'd read any good books lately. She told me she liked science, that she'd been learning about the water cycle before school let out for summer. She said it in this careful, polished way, like she'd been rehearsing how to have a normal conversation in case one ever happened. She asked me if she was in trouble. I told her absolutely not. She asked if her dad was going to be angry. I told her she didn't need to worry about that. She nodded slowly, like she wasn't entirely sure she believed me but was choosing to for now. Then she picked up Captain and held him against her chest, and she didn't say anything else until the paramedics arrived. The EMTs found she was mildly dehydrated and underweight, but otherwise physically okay. No signs of acute injury. They took her to Nationwide Children's Hospital as a precaution, and I rode in the ambulance with her because I was the only adult present, and she had grabbed my hand in the driveway and hadn't let go. The police went to work on the house. A Franklin County detective named Hooper, sharp woman, no nonsense, reminded me of a few supervisors I'd worked under, took my statement in the hospital waiting room. I told her everything I knew, which wasn't as much as I wanted it to be. I told her about Boyd. I told her about my 4 years of unease. I told her about the trust account, which I'd only heard mentioned once, in passing, at a family dinner 2 years ago, when Boyd had made a comment about managing Pepper's finances responsibly. Detective Hooper wrote that down without any visible reaction, which in my experience means the thing you just said is more important than you realize. Then came the phone call. I had been dreading since the ambulance ride. I called the cruise line's guest services number. I explained that there was a family emergency involving a minor child. They connected me to the ship's communications officer, who was professional and efficient and reached my daughter's cabin within 20 minutes. Ingrid called me back on a crackling satellite connection. laughing a little as she picked up, expecting something minor. I told her. The laughter stopped. She said, "That's not possible. She's with Boyd's cousin in Hilliard." I said, "Ingrid, I am sitting in the waiting room at Nationwide Children's. Pepper is in a room down that hall right now getting fluids. She has been locked in your basement for 5 days." The silence on the other end of that call was the longest of my life. Then my daughter started to cry, and I could not immediately tell whether she was crying because she hadn't known or because she had. That question would haunt me for the next 6 weeks. Boyd and Ingrid were on a flight back from San Juan the next morning. Boyd was detained at Port Columbus by Detective Hooper's colleagues before he got to baggage claim. He was arrested on charges of child endangerment, criminal child neglect, and unlawful imprisonment of a minor. That last one because of the slide bolt on the basement door, which the prosecutor later argued constituted a deliberate act of confinement. Ingrid was not arrested that day. She was questioned for 4 hours, and she maintained throughout that she had genuinely believed Pepper was with Boyd's cousin, a man named Terry, who, when police contacted him, confirmed he had received no such request and hadn't seen Pepper in over a year. I wanted to believe my daughter. I still want to believe her. I go back and forth on it even now, and I suspect I will for the rest of my life. What I know for certain is that she had signed the paperwork to leave the country without making any independent effort to confirm Pepper's care arrangements. She had not called to check on the girl in 5 days. She had been on a cruise ship with a swim-up bar and a steel drum band, while her stepdaughter sat in a basement with a granola bar and a stuffed rabbit. Whatever she knew or didn't know, that is on her. It will always be on her. The morning after Boyd's arrest, I drove to the offices of Kathleen Brower, a family law attorney I had worked with professionally many times during my career. I told her the situation. I told her I wanted emergency temporary guardianship of Pepper while the criminal case proceeded. She looked at me across her desk and she said, "Ed, you're not a blood relative." I said, "I know. Tell me what I need to do anyway." She told me. It was not simple. The Okafor family in Dayton, Pepper's maternal grandparents, had priority as blood relatives, and Kathleen advised me to contact them immediately, which I did. Rosemary Okafor answered the phone, and when I explained what had happened, her voice broke in a way that told me she had been afraid of something like this for a long time. She and her husband had been asking Boyd about Pepper for months and getting vague non-answers. They had been starting to think about hiring an attorney themselves. We agreed immediately. I would pursue temporary guardianship to maintain stability for Pepper. She knew me. She had grabbed my hand. She was already at a hospital in Columbus, and the Okafors would pursue permanent custody through the family court in Franklin County. We would work together, not against each other. It was, I think, the most important agreement I made in this entire ordeal. Kathleen filed the emergency petition the same afternoon. We had the police report, the EMT documentation, the hospital records, Detective Hooper's statement, and Pete the plumber, God bless that young man, who agreed to testify about what he had found. We also had the photographs the police had taken of the basement, the slide bolt, the bucket, the 2 remaining granola bars. The judge granted the temporary guardianship hearing for the following Monday. In the meantime, Pepper stayed for 3 days at Children's and then was placed with a licensed foster family while the legal process moved forward. I visited every day. I brought books. I brought colored pencils. I did not bring her to my house yet because I didn't want to do anything that would complicate the court proceedings. She asked me once, on the 2nd day at the foster home, whether her dad loved her. I had given a lot of difficult answers in my career. That was the hardest one. I said, "I think your dad has some problems that have nothing to do with you, and that he has not taken care of you the way you deserved. I don't know what's in his heart." but I know that you are loved. I know that for a fact." She thought about that for a while. Then she said, "Rosemary called me today," she cried. "I know," I said. "She loves you very much. She said I can come to Dayton whenever I want." "That's right. Can Captain come too?" "Captains goes wherever you go," I said. "That's the rule." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The court hearing took 4 hours. Kathleen was thorough and precise. She presented the evidence. She presented my professional background. She presented letters from Pepper's school counselor and her pediatrician, both of whom, it turned out, had documented concerns about Pepper's home environment that they had reported to Franklin County Children's Services, and that Boyd had successfully explained away on 2 separate occasions. That detail landed in the courtroom like a stone dropped in still water. Boyd's attorney argued that the emergency was being exaggerated, that Boyd had made what he termed an unfortunate miscommunication regarding childcare arrangements, and that a non-blood relative had no legal standing to pursue guardianship. He was confident. He had clearly done this before. What he had not anticipated was the trust account. In preparing for the hearing, Kathleen had subpoenaed Pepper's financial records. The life insurance trust, established after Pepper's mother died, funded with $81,000, had been steadily drained over the previous 3 years. Boyd had been appointed as sole trustee. He had used trust funds to cover a lease on a 2022 Audi Q7, a home renovation project that had not touched Pepper's bedroom or any space she used, and 3 separate vacations, including the cruise he had just returned from. At the time of the hearing, the account contained $912. The judge's expression did not change, but the room did. Boyd was held in contempt and ordered to provide a full accounting of the trust expenditures. His attorney's confidence, which had been filling the room like cigarette smoke, quietly evaporated. Temporary guardianship was granted to me, effective immediately, pending the final custody determination. The court also ordered a formal investigation into the trust account by the Franklin County Prosecutor's Financial Crimes Unit. I walked out of that courthouse into a hot August afternoon and sat down on a bench outside, and I put my face in my hands, and I stayed like that for a while. Not crying exactly, something that doesn't have a name. Relief and grief and rage, all arriving at the same time, and none of them quite knowing what to do with each other. My daughter called me that evening. She was staying with a friend. She and Boyd had separated immediately after his arrest, which I suppose said something, though I wasn't sure what. She said she was sorry. She said it several times. I told her I heard her, and that I needed time, and that Pepper was safe, which was the only thing that mattered right now. We have spoken a handful of times since then. It is not the relationship it was. I don't know if it ever will be. Pepper moved into my guest room on a Thursday in September, 2 weeks after the courthouse. I had bought a new bed, repainted the walls a pale yellow, because she told me yellow was her favorite color, and put a small bookshelf in the corner. She walked in, looked around, and set Captain carefully on the pillow. "This is nice," she said. She said it like she was surprised that something could be. The criminal case against Boyd concluded the following spring. He pleaded guilty to child endangerment and criminal neglect in exchange for a reduced sentence. 3 years in a minimum security facility in Chillicothe, with eligibility for parole after 18 months, plus 5 years of probation and permanent termination of parental rights. The Financial Crimes Unit added 2 counts of fiduciary fraud related to the trust account, which added another year to his sentence. His attorney tried to call the financial charges excessive. The judge disagreed. Final custody was awarded to Rosemary and her husband in Dayton, with primary residence alternating. School year with me in Columbus. Summers and holidays with the Okafors. Pepper was consulted in age-appropriate ways. Throughout the process, which I had insisted on because I knew from 31 years of work that children who have no voice in their own futures carry that silence like a weight for the rest of their lives. She said she wanted to stay near her school, near her friends, near the park, 2 blocks from my house where we had started taking evening walks. She said she liked Columbus. She said she liked having dinner on the table at 6 o'clock, she said. I like that you knock before you open the door. That one broke me open a little, though I didn't let her see it. The trust account was partially restored through the fraud conviction. Boyd was ordered to make restitution of $46,000, which will be paid in installments and held in a reconstructed trust managed by an independent fiduciary. It won't be the $81,000 her mother intended, but it will be something. It will be hers. Pepper is 10 now. She is in 4th grade. She has a best friend named Ava who comes over on Fridays, and the 2 of them take over the living room with craft supplies and talk at a volume I have decided to find charming rather than exhausting. She joined the school's science club in October. She still has Captain, though he lives on the bookshelf now instead of being carried everywhere, which her school counselor says is a healthy sign. She no longer needs him for moment-to-moment safety, just for the comfort of knowing he's there. I'm not a perfect guardian. I am 63 years old, and I get tired, and I sometimes forget that 10-year-olds need to be driven places, and that dinner at 6 requires someone to start cooking at 5. There are days when I wonder whether I made the right call, whether a younger household would have been better for her, whether I should have pushed harder for the Okafors to take primary right away instead of an alternating arrangement. Then I think about the morning 3 months ago when Pepper came downstairs before I was even awake, made herself a bowl of cereal, and sat at the kitchen table reading a library book about the solar system. I found her there when I came down at 6:30, completely absorbed, feet tucked up under her, Captain on the chair beside her, because apparently he sometimes leaves the bookshelf on weekends. She looked up at me and said, "Did you know Jupiter has 95 moons?" I said I did not know that, she said. That seems like a lot of company. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her, and she went back to her book, and we stayed like that for a while, and the morning light came through the kitchen window, and everything was quiet in the way that quiet is supposed to be. Not the frightened kind, not the invisible kind, just ordinary and warm and full of the small ordinary sounds of a house that someone living in it. I spent 31 years trying to help children like her. I don't know that I always succeeded. I don't know that I ever fully made peace with the ones I couldn't reach in time. But I reached this one. That's what I carry now.